Hello and welcome everybody. Oh,
I know it says we're live. Give me a second.
Okay,
I gotta make sure to get the confirmation.
cool. Sorry.
Alrighty.
And we gotta turn Jack's video off. That's what we're waiting for. Hold on, Jack. I'll bring you in a minute, okay? All right. Hi, everybody. We're going to get started with the show here. And Michael, we will get you rolling in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hello and welcome everybody live from my kitchen here in Bettendorf, Iowa. It is the second episode of Zoom Room presented by IE Sports Media. Zoom Room is a brand new thing we're trying out here, doing new experimental things while staying safe and socially distanced here. Today's show, on Monday's show, we are trying out a new show and a new format with some exciting panelists that I'm sure you're going to be really excited about. But before I introduce them, let me explain what this show's about. This show is called Draft Class. Now, Draft Class is all about picking your favorite things in sports and beyond and making sure that you have the best team at the end of the draft. So this week's episode, well, we're going to start with sports rivalries, whether it be between two players, between two teams, coaches, or even nonsensical things. We are going to be doing our best to pick the best rivalries in sports. But the catch is, if someone picks something, you are not allowed to pick that thing. So let me go ahead and introduce some of my esteemed panelists. First, my esteemed co-host on the Double Foul podcast, the pride of the 502 of Louisville, Kentucky, Jack Grossman, joins us from the Bluegrass State. Jack, how's it going, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I don't think I'm on video. There we are. I'm doing great. Dilka, thanks for having me on. Excited to, have something to do, which is always a good thing these days, but should be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And then up next, also representing the 502 from IUSTV Sports, 2020 and 2021's future IUSTV Sports co-director, IUSTV former men's tennis beat reporter, got a lot of experience, one of the most versatile guys in our entire program. Drew Fye joins us from Louisville as well. Drew, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks. It's always good to be here. Glad to get some time with you and Jack, and I know someone else. I'll let you do the introduction, so I'll leave that to you.
All right, and then finally, from the Hoosier Network, the pride of Indianapolis, coming to us. You see him on BTN Student U. You see him on Big Ten Network. You see him on so many. I think I just said the Big Ten Network twice, but you see him so much, and he does such a great job of everything that he does. Austin Render joining us from Indy. Austin, how are you doing? Austin, your microphone is muted, my friend. There you go.
There it is. All right, I'm back. Glad to be back. Glad to be heard. I'm ready. I got some obscure rivalries. I got some common rivalries. I'm gonna hit everything. You guys aren't gonna take everything on my list. I guarantee it.
Fantastic. So one of the big important things is I explained the rules earlier of how this draft is going to work, but it's a tricky thing to try and figure out how this draft order is going to be. So the easiest way that I could think of, and this could be difficult between Drew and Jack, just depending on logistics, is who is the closest to Bloomington. So that would put Austin in the first spot, being approximately 50 miles from Indianapolis.
No.
I'm the farthest with over.
I'm Fort Wayne, so I'm.
Oh, you're Fort Wayne. I am so sorry.
I'm probably further than them.
I apologize. So
I wish I was in
this could get pretty tricky. So who thinks? Between the three of you, I am obviously the farthest. I will go last, being a 5.5-hour drive from Iowa to Bloomington. I know all three of you guys have approximately a 2-hour drive, but who is technically the closest, they believe?
I'm going.
I
off
couldn't
of it
tell
right
you.
Now.
Yeah, I'm Google mapping it.
Yeah. I think
You guys are both closer than me, I believe.
Yeah, from my house, it is an hour 55 minutes.
So Jack has an hour 55 minutes. Drew, do you think you are closer than that?
I think he's got me beat by like a few minutes. Let's see.
Yeah.
By a few minutes. All right. So therefore, our draft order is going to be Jack in the number 1 spot. Drew is going to be in the number 2 spot. Austin will be in the number 3 spot. I will be in the 4th spot. And then when the second round begins, I will pick first. Drew will go next, or Austin will go next, then Drew, then Jack. It'll be a snake order, so we'll go back to front. Everything sound good?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Fantastic. So with the first pick in the inaugural draft class of sports rivalries, Jack, you're on the board.
This is great. I get to choose the number one team on my big board that I created over here. Going with the Iron Bowl, Alabama-Auburn football, because this thing has everything that you would want out of a rivalry. You have a lot of great games, great moments, the kick six, the missed field goal chip shot last season. You can go back to the 70s with the Bama punt game where Auburn blocks 2 punts in a 40-second span to upset Bama and cost them a shot at a national championship. These two teams are nationally relevant every year. And most importantly to me, the two fan bases absolutely despise each other. I mean, you have the Alabama fan going and poisoning the trees on the Auburn campus and just stupid stuff like that happens all the time. Petty rivalry. That's what, when people judge rivalries in a lot of different ways, one of the biggest ways I look at it is how much of the two fan bases hate and despise each other. And there are not many that can match Alabama and Auburn. And then to go with the fact that it's not a complete one-sided dominance on the field either, because even though Alabama's been the greatest college football dynasty ever the past decade plus, Auburn still has won 4 out of the last 10 matchups. And every time they win really significant and big, to where I'm comfortable taking that with my number one overall pick over a lot of other really good choices.
Yeah, there's a certain rivalry that comes to mind that I'm surprised you didn't pick, but I will hold my thoughts on that.
I might have to change my strategy because Drew's in here, but
Right.
I figured it would get overlooked so I could take it later in the draft. But Alabama, Auburn, I know we're all talking about Louisville, Kentucky. There's no need to.
Yes.
I mean, the difference between Louisville, Kentucky is the only one that I feel like really matches Alabama, Auburn. The fact that there's a lot of people in the same area. Because that's what's good about Alabama, Auburn. It's not like Michigan, Ohio State, where they're really separated between two different states. They're all together, and they have to deal with each other every single day. Louisville, Kentucky is really the only one that's also really like that, at least on the college level. But the difference is between the two is, as kind of the tiebreaker, Louisville just doesn't win enough in that rivalry, which Auburn does win enough to keep it competitive. And I think Louisville, Kentucky's underrated on the grand scheme of things, but if you're asking me to compare those two, I would give a slight edge to Alabama Auburn just because it's a more competitive rivalry.
Absolutely. Phenomenal way to get this whole draft started. So now I will send it over to Drew. Drew, you are now on the board with the second pick overall in the draft class.
All right. I don't know how Jack's going to feel about this one, but I've been thinking about this one a little bit. I'm going to stick with college basketball. I'm not going to take Louisville, Kentucky just yet.
Interesting.
I think if you're going college basketball, of course, I love Louisville, Kentucky rivalry. I've been immersed with it pretty much my entire life. But if we're looking at college basketball and year in and year out, some of the most competitive matchups over and over again, nothing matches UNC and Duke.
Yep.
Like those two teams battle it out every year.
Drew.
Even this season, where UNC was abysmal, like they were terrible. One of those two games was still ultra competitive. It was an absolute slugfest. Both of these teams are dominant, and most years both of these teams have a legitimate shot to win a national championship, which Louisville and Kentucky are getting there, but they haven't been at that level. Louisville has had a rough patch these past several years, and I don't think anything is able to match UNC Duke when it comes to college basketball.
Can I reboot? It's okay.
I knew it.
Here's my thing. It goes back to how you define what a rivalry is. If you're just looking at pure games, yes, the Duke Carolina games are way better than the Louisville Kentucky games. There's no way to argue that. However, I go back to the fact that Duke and Carolina is a very civil rivalry. They are, the fan bases are calm. They don't hate each other. You don't have the fans poisoning the trees on the other campus. You don't have, in the case of Louisville, Kentucky, two old men fighting while on dialysis in a dialysis center. You don't have that with Duke Carolina. The other thing is Louisville, Kentucky, you got to live with that game once a year. I hate Duke Carolina play 2-3 times every year. I just think that waters it down some. I don't like that they play that often. And Duke, Carolina, they've never been in the NCAA tournament. Louisville, Kentucky have done it 6 times, with 4 of them coming in either the second weekend or the Final Four. And for me, Louisville, Kentucky plays when it matters, and 2 of those were, by the way, this decade, and they hate each other more. But obviously, Duke, Carolina, the games are better. I'm not going to argue that.
And they do play when it matters, because a lot of times I don't have the exact stats on this, but a lot of times they're in the finals of their tournaments, of their conference tournaments in the ACC. They're playing these big games.
But those games don't decide the NCAA tournament.
They don't decide the NCAA tournament. They can set up seeding. They set up the entire
they're big games, but at the end of the day, if you lose that game and you're Duke or Carolina, you don't lose anything.
I don't think you can base a rivalry off its appearances in a random bracket. I mean, that's Indiana, Purdue don't ever play in the NCAA tournament. Does that diminish the rivalry? I don't think so, because it's a random draw. Also, Duke, North Carolina are in the same conference, so that limits their bracket locations and maybe when they can play versus Kentucky and Louisville being in different conferences. But I don't know. I think it's great that you get to see the rivalries in March, but I don't think that's the determining factor on whether or not it's a better rivalry, because it's just luck of the draw that you get each other and you both win. Because, I mean, there's so many. Duke and North Carolina have tons of titles, but they just didn't win at the same time and meet at the same time.
I'm not saying it's my one determining factor. I'm saying it's a factor in a list of 3 or 4 that I would have. And I realize I'm fighting an uphill battle here. Like, I'm not going to win with the majority of the panel or the majority of, the country. But for me, the only way that they could meet is in the Elite Eight. That is the earliest that Duke and Carolina could meet. Louisville and Kentucky have met in the Elite Eight or deeper in the tournament 3 times. And Duke and Carolina haven't. You would think with 2 programs as good as those are, you would have that meeting point at some point in history, and it just hasn't happened. Part of it, yes, Austin, is because of random luck of the draw, but at some point, it's got to happen at some stage, you would think, to where they would meet in a Final Four or something, but it just hasn't happened. Yeah, and maybe in the future that'll change, but at this stage, I would argue that's like point number 3 for me. I would say point number 1 is the fact that just the Louisville, Kentucky fan bases absolutely despise each other. That isn't matched on a level other than Alabama, Auburn. I would say, though, meeting on the biggest stage, something that some of the other rivalries I have on this list, is a way to differentiate rivalries. I think it hadn't been said yet, but Lakers Celtics is great because they have met 12 times in the NBA Finals. Yankees Red Sox, one of the things that makes that one great is because they have postseason insane history. I do. Now
let's not get too deep into some of these future potential takes. Okay. I'm just trying to make sure we're moving along. So that means Austin with the 3rd overall pick in the first round of the draft class.
I don't think I have to even explain it. I'm just gonna pick Louisville, Kentucky, and Jack did all my arguing for me. My points don't even have to be made. I don't live in Kentucky. I live as north as you can get in Indiana, so this rivalry doesn't hit me as much. But from those who are engrossed in it, like Jack, like Drew, they know how important and how just disgusting of a rivalry it is between the 2 fan bases. And I don't think I have to do a whole lot more. Jack kind of made my point for me there. That's my pick.
Yeah, Joe gets sick of hearing me talk about that rivalry on the double foul.
I don't get upset that you talk about it on the double. You get more upset that you talk about it on the double foul, specifically when it comes to when they play the game, it conflicting with the college football semifinal. I love listening to it. I clear the lane. I just sit there and listen. I love hearing you vent about that. I don't get upset.
The Louisville-Kentucky rivalry is great. I would argue it's on par in terms of how much fans hate each other and that stages of things and how competitive the teams are. Even though Louisville's been down the past couple of years, they've had a title team the last decade. They've been Final Four contenders in the last 4 or 5 years. The biggest issue is when they play the game. They played it today or this year, the same time as the LSU, whoever the hell they beat the crap out of. I didn't watch that game. Oklahoma. They played at the same time as the LSU Oklahoma college football playoff game. Now, who the hell of a general fan is going to watch a college basketball regular season game, no matter who it is? You could put Duke, Carolina at that time slot, and no one would watch it over the college football playoff semifinals. I'm fine with that. That's just how, sports are in this country. However, if you're CBS or ESPN or the two schools, you got to find a time to play this game where it's not going up against the freaking college football playoff semifinals or a major bowl, which is what the game goes up against every year. And that, to me, is what really holds that rivalry back more than anything.
Tilka, how
On
many?
the
How many?
bright side, by the second half of that game,
Go ahead, Drew.
I say by the second half of that game, none of it mattered.
Yeah, but people still weren't watching that game. They're still watching LSU Oklahoma.
Austin, you had something to say real quick before we move
Yeah,
on?
how many picks are we making?
So we are making 4 picks overall. So we'll do 4
Okay.
rounds. This will be the end of the first round. And so with my pick and the final pick of the first round here, I'm going to open it up here. I'm moving away from college. I'm not picking pro. And when I sat down to make this list, I felt that of all the rivalries in sports, this is the one that stood out to me the most. It's nonsensical, but when I say it, you guys are going to go, oh, that makes sense. And my pick for the first round is Detroit fans versus any sense of happiness in their lifetime. Because so often we have seen so many great talents go through the city of Detroit, Barry Sanders, Calvin Johnson, Miguel Cabrera, and they have been left and sold short so many times when there has been so much potential to go through that city. So that's why I'm going with that pick for my first round. If anybody has any comments on Detroit fans versus happiness, that's my biggest sports rivalry.
No, I have a friend who's a Detroit fan, and he lives through a tough time. He's a Lions fan, so that makes things really difficult on him in NFL season. So I don't disagree with you. All you gotta look at is the Bad Boys. They were fun, but they got it past MJ. But I mean, that was a tough sequence for them, and Detroit's had plenty of heartbreak.
Yeah,
The
it's Detroit the new city now that like Cleveland's won a title and the Cubs have won the World Series. Is that just the new
Yeah.
city
Yeah,
that just
probably.
everyone feels sorry for?
Yeah.
Probably.
Because I went back and forth between Detroit and Minnesota, because if I'm remembering the statistic correctly, Minnesota is still the only city with all 4 pro sports teams, so NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB, in the 21st century to not have a team go to the major championship.
Yeah, they still won WNBA titles at least though.
That's true.
Yeah,
The
they got
Minnesota Lynx is bomb.
Lynx.
Minnesota Lynx is bomb. So that is the end of the first round. So with our first round picks, Jack goes with Auburn, Alabama. Drew goes with UNC Duke. Austin goes with Louisville,
Kentucky. Yep.
and I have Detroit versus happiness. Now, I am going to take it back as we enter the second round here with my next pick. And I thought of some of the more undersold rivalries. I may be picking this too soon, but I wanted to make sure I get this pick since I won't be picking for a really long time, because every time I watch these two teams play, I get excited for what exactly is going to happen on the court, because it's physical, it's intense, it's crazy every time.
You're doing Iowa and Iowa State, aren't you?
I am not. I am
Really?
not doing
How about
Iowa State. I am doing Cincinnati versus Xavier.
Yes.
Because every
that's a
time
good
one.
those two teams play, there is some sort of physical altercation. Someone's getting suspended. Those two teams are playing their heart out. Jack, you were talking about, Auburn, Alabama. Those two teams have to live within the same state. These two schools are on top of each other in the same city. And it's the classic public school versus private school type of situation. And it's so fun every single time. And I wish it was played more often, and I wish it just had more popularity. So I love Cincinnati Xavier.
Yeah, I wish it had more national relevance also. It'd be fun. It's simmered down a tad now that Chris Mack and Mick Cronin have both left the Cincy area schools. But you talk about, the same day as the Watford shot was the famous Yancey Gates brawl, which was phenomenal. Just so much nonsense and crap. I love that. I agree. It's the most underrated rivalry, at least in the college landscape.
I was
As a
hoping I
kid-
could have done that for the third round, but
As a kid, I watched that watch shot. I was so excited. I turned on Sports Center that night, and what's the first thing on Sports Center? The Xavier Cincinnati brawl. It's not this crazy shot to beat the #1 team. It was all about the brawl, and I was very disappointed as a 12-year-old trying to cope with the fact that there was a brawl taking over our spotlight.
All right, so that concludes my opening pick for the second round. Austin, we turn it over to you for your second round pick. What you going with there, man?
I've got a long list. I got to decide where I want to go.
Don't take mine.
I think because I live with a Chicago Bears fan, I have to go with Bears Packers. That is a hated rivalry between the two fan bases. I mean, I think Aaron Rodgers has almost heated up that rivalry. While the Bears aren't winning a lot of them, Bears fans hate Aaron Rodgers because there's so much baggage on him, and I just think that has kind of ramped up the rivalry a little bit. And living with a Chicago Bears fan, anytime the Packers comes up, he goes into a rage fit, and it is very funny. So I think in the grand scheme of things, taking it outside of college, I think Packers Bears is one of the longest and one of the most hated rivalries in sports.
I was this close to picking Bears Packers. I was really, really tempted. I felt I had that expectation to pick that. It's, to me though, at least as a Bears fan, is as much as it pains me to say, just outside of 2018 when the Bears won the division and they actually have a good season, since Rodgers has taken over and even extending back into the Favre years, there really hasn't been, if Chicago had obviously not, it doesn't need to be a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback like Rodgers or what Favre was, but having an equal fight most of the time, where even with the 2018 season, the Packers were awful that year. They fired their head coach. They looked terrible. They were gassed out, and the Bears just absolutely dominated them, even outside of that week one match, which I don't want to talk about. But having them be equal at the same time really prevented me from, at least in my lifetime, viewing that rivalry to be as great as it can be. But I still think it's the best.
I'm taking more of the historical context to that one as well. That's a historically great rivalry.
Drew, we move on to you now.
All
Your
right.
second pick.
So with my first one, I went more of the ongoing competitiveness, and I love college rivalries. There's absolutely nothing that beats it. So I'm sticking with college. I'm moving over to college football, and I'm going to address Jack's point a little bit about how much these fans hate each other. It's unreal how much Ohio State and Michigan just cannot stand each other. And I'm talking, football and basketball, but I think mostly football. When you get into the Ohio State and Michigan week on Ohio State's campus, they eliminate the letter M. I don't know how they do it. There's 26 letters in the alphabet, and they just got rid of one. But each week, going into that rivalry matchup, and I understand that Michigan hasn't had that success as of late, which has sort of tampered it down, but it's incredibly hard to tamper that sort of rivalry down when you have people walking around campus like graffitiing and spray painting and crossing out like one full letter just because that letter is addressed to their rival school. Like, that's insane. Like, teachers will send out like assignments that don't have the letter M in it. Like, it's a whole new atmosphere in Columbus, and it's incredible.
Yeah, as much as every year in football, Michigan football wants to beat Ohio State, I think Ohio State takes it way more seriously, which I find really, really interesting.
Since 2003, would anyone like to guess how many times Michigan has defeated Ohio State in football?
I know since 2010 they've only won once. Is it still only once?
Austin's got it.
Wow.
Well, that's
So
why I'm not diving back into Louisville and Kentucky again, but the biggest gripe with that rivalry is that it's not competitive enough. Michigan-Ohio State is way less competitive than that one is. Michigan just doesn't put up a fight. And for me, it's just, Ohio State's always going to win. Yes, the fan bases hate each other, but you don't have that same in-state nuttiness that you get with mainly, with an Auburn, Alabama, to where the fans are really, for the most part, separated a little bit more, and they're just kind of congregating for that one game, to where Michigan, Ohio State's great. Don't get me wrong. And it's a great historical rivalry, but Michigan's got to win some games, man.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Work in progress.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So now we go to close out the second round of this draft. Jack, it's back to you.
Man, I can't believe this one fell this far, but I'm definitely going to take it. Yankees Red Sox is, I would have up there. I had this number 2 on my big board. So I'm getting number 1 and number 2 on my big board on this. This has absolutely everything you could want in a rivalry. You have the Curse of the Bambino. You have two fan bases that absolutely despise each other, and you have spectacular moments that have helped decide seasons, whether it be Bucky Dent's home run in 1978 and that great pennant race, the 2003 ALCS that goes 7 games and Aaron Boone hits the walk-off home run, the 04 ALCS that the Red Sox are the only MLB team ever to erase a 3-0 deficit and win a best-of-7 series, going on to break the curse of the Bambino, win their first title in 87 years, and really just kind of the role reversal in the 21st century to where the Red Sox for so long were always chasing the Yankees, always trying to match that prestige with the 27 World Series titles and the curse of the Bambino. Since that 04 title, the Red Sox have won 3 and the Yankees have won 1, and largely it's the Yankees chasing the Red Sox the last 15 plus years. So the dynamics kind of switched, which has been really interesting to see. And this rivalry has just a little bit of everything: players fighting, teams fighting, success. It's one of, if not the greatest rivalry in sports.
Absolutely.
No arguments here.
Yeah, I think it really does cover everything, especially you mentioned the postseason rivalry as well, because so often, fortunately, the way MLB postseason works, it's not the biggest field on either side. You do get those.
Which I like how small the
it's
field
very
is.
Cool. Yeah, and it's cool that you get more often those opportunities to see rivals face off against one another. So a phenomenal pick there to close out the second round. I don't think anybody can debate or argue with you on that one. And now we send it to the third round, and it's back in your corner again, Jack. So what is your third pick for this draft?
Man, I have a lot of tough choices on this one. There's a lot of different ways I could go with this. I have a tennis one that I really like, but I'll save it for Drew because I have a feeling he'll want it. I'll go the NBA, go with Lakers Celtics. I've harped so much on intimacy with rivalries and how being close in proximity to each other, what the two fan bases hating each other matters so much. I mean, this is kind of the exception to that rule. Obviously, the Celtics on the East Coast, Lakers on the West Coast. You have the whole racial element of the 1980s, which ESPN hits on so well with the 30 for 30 about the Lakers-Celtics rivalry. But at the end of the day, they've met 12 times in the NBA Finals, and you just don't ever see that with anyone else in any sort of fashion in North American sports, just how competitive the two winningest franchises in the NBA. They combined to win 33 titles, and a lot of them have come against each other. I mean, for so long, the Lakers couldn't get over that hump against the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals, but when you look at it, LA's won 3 out of the last 4 times that they've met in the finals after losing the first 8. So it's kind of balancing out a little bit more out of that. They've met in the finals in 4 different decades, which of course, a lot of them coming in the 60s and the 80s, but also twice in 2008 and 2010. So it's just, when you look at prestige and winning and playing when it matters, there's no rivalry that exemplifies that more than Lakers Celtics.
Yeah, and they both have the big figures that are able to sort of carry the legacies of both teams too. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, that whole back and forth, like that. Yeah, great pick there.
Then even beyond that, into the late 2000s series, when you have figures like Kobe versus the big 3 that Boston was able to put together. So it really does stand the test of time too.
This is not just this rivalry, but I feel like it's all the NBA and it's even part of the NFL. Are rivalries dying a little bit in professional sports? I just feel like everybody's becoming buddies, and like that rivalry's not there. They just played a few weeks before the whole quarantine thing happened. It was like a Sunday afternoon game on ABC. I don't think there's a huge draw to it right now, and I don't think there's a huge draw to a lot. I mean, the rivalries right now certainly in the NBA are like player-to-player rivalries. Like Russell Westbrook gets in rivalries with everybody.
Everyone hates Patrick Beverly.
Yeah, everybody hates Patrick. Enes Kanter gets into fights and whatever. But I don't know. I feel like rivalries are dying because we're becoming a sports society that's just friends with everybody now. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it certainly is a bummer to lose some of the – I mean, you look at the 70s and 80s, with Bird and Johnson and all these guys, and even the Kobe Bryant and Garnett and Pierce, I mean, those rivalries were heated, and that's just it's not really the case anymore.
Yeah, I think another great example of that, just in the last decade plus, is Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan. Freaking hated each other on the court. It's just a different era now, and I don't know if it's for better or for worse, but it's just kind of how it is today. There's not really much really to say on it, but you are absolutely right when it comes to that.
Yeah,
It's certainly an interesting topic to explore in certainly a long form in another space in another time, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point. But I believe that takes us to Drew for our next pick, if I'm remembering correctly. So Drew, yes.
And so Jack, you're sort of setting me up on this. I was gonna wait a little bit for the tennis rivalry.
He's gonna take it.
I'm gonna ask you, where do you want me to go with this? Because there's so much I can do with this. Obviously, if you want to start off with the big three, the big three are incredible. If you want to get even smaller than that, what Federer and Nadal have had for the past,
that's what I had.
I had that on my list too.
Federer and Nadal are absolutely insane. They've gone back and forth. You watched them play in the finals of the Australian and Wimbledon and the U.S. Open and the French. The finals of any tournament, Federer and Nadal were there. They were unmatched. Djokovic has come on as of late. And I think what's incredible now is this is one of those rivalries where they don't all hate each other, where they all are friends. They've got a mutual respect for each other. But even now, as all three of them are into their 30s, they're still challenging each other, not only for the top three spots in the world, but for that legacy of being the best ever, for the greatest of all time. And most people assumed once Federer got the Grand Slams record that he would move on to that and sort of run away with it, especially since Nadal specialized on clay. But now Nadal is coming on stronger. Djokovic is playing out of his mind. Before this quarantine thing, well, I guess even still now, he's undefeated in 2020. He had not lost, won the Grand Slam, and was on his way to possibly one of the best seasons in the history of any male tennis player. And Nadal still challenging Federer for that Grand Slam record. Djokovic is on his way up too and is a little younger, so maybe has some more time. So that rivalry is absolutely insane, just with the big three going in and out. Just when you look at a Grand Slam final and they're there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the longevity of them is the most impressive thing. Yeah. I mean, everyone talks about LeBron James in the NBA and what he's doing, and that's spectacular in its own right. But to have not one, not two, but all three of those guys play at such a high level for as long as they had, it's just absolutely insane. I got to ask you, Drew, if you had to choose one right now, who would you choose? Choose over for who has had the best career out of those three?
Who has had the best career? I still think that Federer is going to hold it. He still holds the title. I think he's going to lose it. Nadal will probably pass him for most Grand Slams. Just Nadal's physically been better. And something interesting about Djokovic is that out of the level of tournament right under a Grand Slam, like the Masters 1500, Djokovic is the only male tennis player to win every one of those tournaments. Federer hasn't done it. Nadal hasn't done it. And if Djokovic wins again in Cincinnati, I believe he'll be the first to have done it twice. So that level of competitiveness across the board is just absolutely unmatched. I think Djokovic might end up with that legacy by the end of his career. But right now, it's still Federer.
I think this whole quarantine thing hurts Federer because he loses a year of possibly trying to add to his totals.
While that's true, he hasn't been playing all that well as of late, and he has struggled with injury. And I think he had already announced he was sitting out the clay court season. So losing the French Open actually helps him because no one gets the French Open. Mm-hmm. So it's giving him time to rest. I think if anyone, it hurt Djokovic because no one was challenging Djokovic in the year 2020. Like, he ran through the Australian Open and was winning tournaments across the board. So he could have given Nadal a real run at getting up at winning the French. And even then, Nadal wins the French Open. He now ties Federer's record. And that's one less year on his best surface that Nadal has to try and challenge Federer. So, I mean, all across the board, it hurt them. I think Federer dealing with the injury helps a little bit to give him some time to recover. But yeah, it also takes another year off his body, off of him physically, which he needs all he can get at this point.
Yeah.
Phenomenal analysis as always. You're the key tennis guy in the IU Sports Media Department. Absolutely unrivaled in that aspect. Great pick. Our first player-to-player pick or person-to-person pick, which I'm surprised we've gone this far with that being said. So as I close out the third round here, I'm very happy I was able to make it this far and be able to go with this pick. I think. Oh, Austin! I skipped Austin. I am so sorry. Austin, please go ahead.
I don't think you're going to take what I'm going to take.
Because we keep going back and forth. I keep losing the order. It's the first episode. Give me a break. I'm sorry, Austin. I disrespected you so badly throughout this whole thing. Please go ahead.
I'm still trying to decide if I want to go with the hometown or an obscure rivalry, and I think I'm going to go obscure because I'm gonna say this: the Purdue-IU rivalry is dying. I'm sorry, but IU needs to win. And before that one becomes, there's still a mutual hatred. Growing up in Indiana, I have tons of Indiana fans and tons of Purdue friends, but there's no base for Indiana right now. They're not winning. So I'm gonna go, and I honestly think Indiana-Kentucky might be higher than Indiana-Purdue. They don't play anymore. I'm gonna go obscure, the Holy War, BYU.
I put it on my list.
That rivalry is something special, and I always make it a point of interest for me to watch that football game, and even sometimes basketball as well, because the way those two teams hate each other is just absolutely fantastic. It is a heated football game. There's almost always a fight. That is appointment viewing for me. So I go a little off the beaten path. We're going out to the West Coast. I think the Holy War is a fantastic rivalry.
Is there a better name of a rivalry in sports than the Holy War?
Yeah,
I mean, that definitely goes in the category of most underrated rivalries.
Absolutely.
For sure. I also love when they play the game. It's always either the first or second weekend of the college football season. It's usually a Thursday night.
We need a game. Yeah, we need a game, and that fits the bill perfectly.
Absolutely, and it gives people like me, and I'm sure many of you who have never been to Utah or don't necessarily understand what all that experience is like between, you know, the low-key football power that BYU has been in the past. Obviously, not as much anymore, but they've had great teams. I mean, both these programs have had really great teams and great players come out of each of their programs. So it's one to really keep your eye on, especially because it's like Austin said, it's perfect for when you're slogging through all these FBS versus FCS games, and you get a really good marquee matchup as you're sort of, even though BYU's not in the Pac-12, but Utah is your Pac. It's a perfect Pac-12 after dark type game.
Yeah, absolutely. Put Bill Walton on the call for the football game.
That would be
phenomenal. That would be
now
phenomenal.
It's your turn, Toka.
All right, fantastic. I was really upset. I was thinking about making that my fourth round pick. I'm really upset that I didn't get that. I was hoping I could keep that in the back pocket.
Great game.
But for the third round, I'm going to stick with college football in this one. And this one is, I think, one of the most amazing spectacles we have in sports. It comes at a really, really cool and sentimental time of the year. I'm going with Army-Navy. I think that game, having it played on its own week, even though it's played alongside a lot of conference championships,
it's the week after the conference championships.
The week after. Okay, thank you. Having it the week after conference championships, having it be its own sort of thing. And as you know, it ramps up towards the holiday season. A lot of people are feeling sentimental. It's a cool bonding moment and a cool appreciation moment for people in the military, for people not only in the United States, but those spread around the world, to give them something to talk about, even though these two great forces are working alongside each other constantly. It's cool to have sort of that sibling rivalry, and to see whatever stadium they play in, whether it's Philadelphia or DC, have it packed with all those people in uniform. And then I think the coolest part, though, always is whatever newfangled technology the Air Force has for the flyover, and you just sort of sit there and look, and how did they build those things? And the game itself too, it's so wacky and bizarre with the two offenses both of those schools run. So it's so different, it's so unique, it's so fun, and it's so enjoyable to me.
Yeah.
And with that, no argument, no thoughts. All right,
I'm
I
not
will,
gonna argue Army Navy.
So moving on to our fourth and final round, I'm really torn between two picks here, and I think I'm gonna go with the homer pick. The other pick I want to go to, I'll save it for the honorable mention round. But
Okay.
the hint is that it's very similar a la Cincinnati Xavier. But I'm gonna go with the homer pick, and I'm gonna go Iowa State.
There it is.
There you go. I knew. I'm sure some of y'all saw it coming. I know it's the games are so good in the worst absolute sense possible with how they struggle to break double digits every single time.
Wasn't it
And to see all
10-9 this year?
it's usually something along those lines. I think my personal favorite would have to be I went to Iowa State. I watched it in the Iowa City bar. I tailgated that day, but I believe the final score was 9-6 off of 5 field goals the entire game, and it was one of the most miserable contests I've ever seen. But it gets weird, it gets wacky, and the tailgate aspect of it, and the reason why I love it so much is because they played in early September, and it's still warm enough out to enjoy it, and it kind of fits that bill like what we were talking with BYU Utah. It's a non-conference game, so it fits perfect at the start of the season. It's always competitive, even though, you know, like Austin was saying with IU and Purdue fans, you have a lot of friends who lean one way or the other, so you have people in your life that you can talk smack to the entire time. But it's fun, it's competitive, and the tailgate before it, even if it's in Ames, especially if it's in Iowa City, are absolutely unmatched, especially for the nice weather that you usually get. So that's my homer pick for all of you. I knew I had to do something for myself. I tried to pick, you know, interesting and unique and nuanced ones, but I can't leave that on the board. It would be a disservice to myself and my fellow Iowans. So I'm going with Iowa State for my last pick. And now we send it over to Austin. What is your final pick of the draft?
I have 5 more on my list, and I know I'll name them all. And now I have more popping up in my head that I'm feeling like I should have mentioned. I'm gonna go Indiana, Kentucky. I'm going with that one as my last pick.
Yes.
To me, that is one of the underrated rivalries, mainly because it doesn't happen anymore. And you know why it doesn't happen? Because Indiana stormed the court, and now one of the coaches doesn't want to play him again. That is fantastic. And I'm going to say when this rivalry resumes, because it will eventually. When this resumes, it will be fantastic, because who knows what's going to happen with the way that it ended in 2011 to now. I don't know. But the way that the 2016 NCAA tournament game is arguably my favorite game as an Indiana Hoosier fan. That game had everything. It was one of the more competitive round of 32 games you could get. Just so many great players in that game, 2 great teams. And it was something that we hadn't tasted in 5 years, was that rivalry. We hadn't gotten it in so long. And that, it just, as a fan growing up, as an Indiana fan, Purdue was always the team you needed to beat. Kentucky was the team you wanted to beat, because Kentucky was the giant. Kentucky was the team that everyone wanted to beat because they're better. And Purdue was just the team you needed to beat, because if you lose to Purdue, you'll never hear the end of it. But Kentucky was the Duke, you got to beat that team. And Indiana came nowhere close for so many years, and then the Watt shot happened, and it was fantastic. I miss that rivalry a lot. I think there's more hatred there than people realize, and just because it's 2 blue bloods, well, a semi-blue blood and a blue blood, and I think there's more hatred underneath that people don't see.
Indiana, Kentucky is one of the few rivalries that has become more heated since they stopped playing. Mm-hmm. I mean, you look at something
like just lighting the fire.
Yep. I mean, like, you look at something like Texas A&M that doesn't get played anymore. That rivalry has cooled off since they stopped playing. Indiana, Kentucky is the exact opposite because of the way the game ended, and every time anyone brings up any factoid about it, there's just an explosion. I mean, I had a stupid video get over 200,000 views just of Indiana recreating the Watt shot during halftime so far earlier this year. I mean, just the amount that it takes to light a fuse on this rivalry is absolutely spectacular and hilarious. And I think the fact that they don't play anymore has actually made that aspect of it even, I don't want to say better, but I don't really have a better word for it than better, as it's just so much more heated now than I think it was even when they played. When they do eventually start playing again, which that won't be until Calipari leaves, I fully believe that. There's been so much talk about where to play it. How about this? I'm going to throw it out there. Obviously, I'm biased. I'd say this. Play the game in Louisville in the Yum Center. There's actually never been – there's actually Freedom Hall in Louisville is the site that has hosted more IU Kentucky games than any other site, whether it be anywhere in Indy, Bloomington, or Rupp Arena. Freedom Hall in Louisville, the city of Louisville, has hosted more IU UK games. And you talked about trying to get an actual 50-50 even split. That's a place where you could get a true neutral site, which doesn't happen much when you play these dopey neutral site college basketball games, especially when Kentucky's involved with it with their big fan base.
I don't want it. Personally, I don't want – what other rivalry is played at a neutral site?
Red River rivalry?
Yeah.
Kansas, Missouri, and Kansas City.
I don't know. I think you miss that aspect of the fans, and neutral site just brings the old fans in, and the students don't go. The atmosphere's not the same. You're missing a whole aspect of the
I mean, we've obviously never experienced that, but I know I'm just going off a testimonial at this stage. My dad went to a lot of those games in Louisville in the 90s when they used to go back and forth between there and Indy, and he calls that some of the greatest atmospheres he's ever been in, just because you have these two charged up fan bases in the same arena. I generally agree with you that I'd much rather have home court than neutral site games, but I think this is an exception to that because of the proximity of the schools, because you can have a true neutral site to where I think it works, because I think you can still have really good crowds even if you're not playing it on campuses. But generally, yes, I do agree with you that college basketball, college football games are almost always going to be better on campuses. And I wish there were more true home and home games on campus rather than all these neutral site extravaganza events that are just 25% filled in the arenas.
If you want to trigger a Kentucky fan, which it doesn't make any sense, but just talk about the watch shot.
Yes.
Even though they then beat Indiana in the Sweet 16 that year and won the national championship, lost twice the entire year, they get so triggered by that one moment, and it is fantastic. And Indiana could have beaten them in the tournament if Oladipo doesn't foul out with 5 minutes to go.
Yeah. And Verdell Jones doesn't tear his ACL in the Big Ten tournament too. That never gets brought up.
That too, yeah. That was an underrated aspect of things. But that's my pick. I had to go something like Tilka with a homer pick. But I just think that rivalry is more heated right now because it doesn't play, like you said, Jack, than Indiana-Purdue.
Absolutely great pick there, Austin. I love that we're getting into some even more personal picks than ones we've already had before. So with just 2 picks remaining in the entire draft, Drew, I send it over to you. What do you have, my friend?
Okay, so I know you just commended people for getting personal. I'm going to go on a complete opposite track. I'm just going to get weird. Something that I barely know, but I feel like we don't even have to. I want to address this. I was looking earlier at just some of these best rivalries. I was just curious as to what other people said. And I found we're getting international here with a sport that I doubt any of us follow.
Oh, God.
No, but this is a good pick.
Give me cricket.
I'm certain it's a good pick. India, Pakistan, and cricket.
Yes.
Those
Phenomenal pick.
countries are the cricket powerhouses of the world, one of the biggest sports internationally that just has not had that same hold in the U.S. But those 2 countries are so competitive, so insanely talented, and I think it's a rivalry that I at least want to address here because it's something that most people we're not going to talk about because none of us are really tuning in to watch cricket on TV. Unfortunately, I tried once. I watched part of India, New Zealand. It was interesting, but I had no idea what was going on, But India, Pakistan, if you want to get just these 2 countries, when they go head to head, it is insane. So I just wanted to have some fun with that.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a whole level of European soccer rivalries that we haven't touched that I know that could be its own episode.
I had a
Deep
couple
in.
that I thought about, but I didn't want to open that can of worms because once you pick one, you got to pick like all of
Yeah.
them.
That's why I'm saving this for the end, so we don't have to keep going.
Yeah. Well, I don't know any other cricket rivalries, so I think we'll just
No.
stick with that one.
That's fair.
Great pick there, Drew. A lovely, phenomenal pick, especially one that has so much historical context too between the history of two, not only cities or states, but two entire nations on an entirely different continent. But a phenomenal, awesome pick there from to close out your draft there, Drew. So Jack, to close out and send everything home here, what do you finishing this whole thing off with?
It's got to be a good one.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways I could go with this. I have like conventional ones like Michigan, Michigan State. I'm going to go more of an obscure route. I do have a horse racing one, but I think Togi said we're going to do honorable mention, so I'll save it for that because the other one I have I think is better. I'm going boxing. Back in the day, Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier.
Yeah.
Back in the 1970s, they had 3 fights. Ali won 3 of them, but 2 of the 3 are considered to be arguably the greatest fights of all time. Frazier beating Ali in the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden, in 1971. And then the third fight, known as the Thriller in Manila, because it took place in Manila, but Muhammad Ali is credited for basically inventing smack talk, trash talk, whatever word you want to put on for it. And he trashed Joe Frazier so much in the months leading up to this fight, basically verbally assaulting and bullying this man, that Joe Frazier, per at least 4 different articles I looked up on this, because I kind of fell down that rabbit hole while researching stuff for this last night. Joe Frazier was medically just mentally scarred the rest of his life from the verbal abuse and assault Muhammad Ali put on this man before their third fight. And for me, there's nothing that says a rivalry more than something as honestly kind of horrific as that is what Ali was able to say due to this man. And if you ever have spare time on YouTube, look up some of those pre-fight pressers, because the art of trash talk was invented leading up to that fight.
Absolutely a great pick too. And if for those of you looking to find streaming and more things like that, Will Smith's biopic Ali, where he plays the man himself, Muhammad Ali, a phenomenal depiction of his life and sort of how Smith was able to physically prepare for that role, because obviously it takes a lot to build yourself as a heavyweight champion of the world. But the way that he is able to mimic Ali's specific tone of voice is absolutely phenomenal and gives you great insight into that whole thing. If you're looking for a more cinematic experience rather than going down a horrific 2-hour Wikipedia.
Yeah, HBO has a new 2-part documentary on Ali that I haven't watched yet that I'm going to at some point. He's just a really interesting figure if you want to dive deeply into someone from way in the past.
Absolutely. And phenomenal way to close out this entire draft. It's been a lot of fun. We still have about 5 minutes left here, so I'm going to go through some of the comments you've been getting on YouTube, some really interesting ones. Ali Frazier was one of the ones that came up. Some surprises that the game between Michigan and Ohio State dropped to the second round. One for the current culture, Carol Baskin versus Joe Exotic, I see pop up as some people's favorite rivalries. But now we'll get into some of the honorable mentions, guys. What are some of the things that didn't make the cut? Austin, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I've got a couple. So I'll go more mainstream, but not mainstream in the national media. The Egg Bowl, we had a guy get a personal foul penalty for peeing like a dog in the end zone. That rivalry has a lot of heat to it down there in Mississippi. Arizona State. I don't even remember. I'm forgetting what that one's called. Territorial Cup. Is that what it is? I think that's what it is.
That sounds right.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And that's a heated rivalry out there in Arizona that obviously we don't get to experience much living in the Midwest. And then one that I saw in person. It was a one-time thing, but it was absolutely fantastic. It's the only time that I have been to the Horseshoe. I went with my grandpa, 10 years ago or so. And Ohio's Bobcat mascot fought Brutus the Buckeye. And we thought it was a joke orchestrated, put on by the two mascots. Turns out the Bobcat wanted to be the Bobcat only to do that. That was his only purpose, was to become the Ohio Bobcat mascot so that he could fight Brutus. So that to me is, I almost picked it as my fourth pick because it's so good. It's just a priceless memory. The fact that I was there and watched it, and everyone around us is like, what is going on right now? Is this an actual thing? Everyone's cheering on Brutus, but it was quite a moment, and a rivalry renewed, I hope, at some point in the future.
The high school that Drew and I went to down in Louisville had a similar moment where our high school, DuPont Manual, played the rival high school male, which the football rivalry is actually one of the oldest in the country. Since we're on this topic, I'm not going to dive too deeply into that. But at a basketball game, I think it was my sophomore year, the mascots got into a full-fledged fight. Also, that was not scripted, and it made CNN, and the administrations were not happy, but the students were just, it was a beautiful moment in a way. But I also had some other honorable mentions. I also had the Egg Bowl, like Austin. That's going to get even more heated with Kiffin now at Ole Miss. And that's going to be, and Leach, yes.
Yeah.
It's going to be.
It's both coaches their jobs after that bowl game. It's remarkable.
I also had it in a conventional sense, Michigan State. I think especially on the basketball side, that is very underrated, very heated, a lot of fun to watch, and high stakes every time those two teams play. Then the horse racing one, I had Affirmed and Alydar in 1978. In the 3 Triple Crown races, Affirmed beats Alydar. They finish 1-2 in all 3 races. Then Alydar comes back and beats Affirmed in the Breeders' Cup. There's a lot of research, a lot of history on that one if anyone wants to dig into it, but Affirmed and Alydar in 1978 in the Triple Crown Trail, which Affirmed won the Triple Crown. Very interesting rivalry. That's kind of obscure.
We're running low on time here, but Drew, get yours in real quick, and then I'll get mine in, because then Dr. Claudio.
All right, I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Harvard-Yale. It's the Ivy matchup. I love that. And then one for my own personal taste, and I was even thinking about it when we came to tennis. This one isn't as well known of a tennis one, but just Nick Kyrgios versus the world.
Anyone.
The Australian upstart. Like, he's so much fun to watch, but I don't know if there's anyone who he hasn't made mad. He's such a fun player. He's so talented, but like, from making comments about like Stan Wawrinka's girlfriend, can't do that. To underhanding serving Nadal, which, like, I don't have a problem with that, but Nadal did. He's made enemies along the way. So much fun to watch. And we'll see how his career goes. He's still a young guy.
Absolutely. The one I wanted to close mine out with, I was debating on picking this one, but it might be a bit too obscure. Florida International versus Miami. Whenever those two teams face each other in football, be the same result as Cincy Xavier. Look up some of their early fights when FIU was starting their program in the early 2000s. Phenomenal conflicts there. And I was really tempted to pick Cubs White Sox because it doesn't sit on my mind that often. But when it comes to the week of that game, I want to beat the Cubs so badly as a White Sox fan. So those were my 2 honorable mention picks. And now we bring in Galen Clavio, who has one quick one he wanted to throw in here. So Galen, what do you got for us?
I love all these picks. They've been excellent. The one I wanted to throw in, it's world soccer with a bit of a geopolitical twist, and it's El Salvador versus Honduras, where these two teams played in a World Cup qualifier for the 1970 World Cup. This was in 1969, and there were already tensions between the countries, but the games resulted in rioting that resulted in a full-fledged war between the two countries that lasted for 5 days. I mean, a lot of these rivalries are rough. There's some fights occasionally. Rarely does it break out into complete, like, conventional armed conflict, and that's what we had there. So I think any list, we got to put El Salvador and Honduras on there.
Phenomenal.
I gotta say, we didn't even mention the game that had an actual fight this year, Kansas and Kansas State. We didn't mention Oklahoma and Texas, or Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. We kind of disrespected the Big 12. Honestly, there are some good ones out there. Just had to throw that out.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's so many great rivalries out there. We'd love to hear what you guys have for your picks in the draft, whatever we didn't cover, whatever we didn't get to in our honorable mentions. Maybe you have something more conventional like a Kansas State, or you know of civil conflict between 2 Central American countries in the late 1960s and early 1970s. So go ahead and throw those our way. But it's been a pleasure doing the draft class. Guys, did you have a good time this morning?
Absolutely.
So much fun.
Yeah.
Love it.
Awesome. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll be back soon for another episode of Draft Class. But once again, for Jack Grossman, Austin Render, Drew Fryer, producer Galen Clavio, I've been Michael Tilka. We've had a great hour spending this with you guys. We hope to see you soon. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.